I froze when I heard my wife say, "I'm single," to a strange man at the company party. I was coming back from the bathroom, still drying my hands, and that sentence cut through the air like a shrapnel straight to the chest. The room was full, but the world went silent, as if all the voices had disappeared, except hers. I stood there, motionless, with my back turned to the two of them, my mind spinning as if trying, in vain, to find a plausible reason for what I had just heard. Maybe it was a joke, I thought. Maybe she didn't know he was there by mistake. Maybe she was drunk, confused, had misunderstood the question. But the way she tossed her hair to the side, her open, relaxed smile, the way she placed the glass to her lips and looked straight into the man's eyes, all of this belied any innocence. It was certain. That sentence was no accident. She wanted to appear single. For him. What came next was a succession of invisible stabs. The conversation continued as if I didn't exist. As if years of history, promises, and family dinners had never happened. She spoke of herself as if she were free, unencumbered, completely available. And him? He looked at her as if he had found a winning ticket forgotten in the pocket of an old coat. And me? There I was, in the side hallway of the salon, hidden between a wall of mirrors and a vase with artificial flower arrangements, feeling my blood heat, freeze, and heat again, trying to decide whether to stop everything or pretend nothing had happened. But I am not made of silence. Or of pretense. That night was ground zero. I left the party with a new weight on my shoulders and a kind of clarity that hurts. The pieces started to fit together, the nights out, the smiles on the phone, the apologies with lowered eyes, the days when she seemed distant, absent. The goodnight kiss that no longer came with her eyes closed. The rush to hang up the phone. The absence in the little things, where before there was affection. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was what she told the world about us while she still slept next to me every night. It was the fact that I was there, being faithful, planning vacations, saving for our daughter's college tuition, thinking about buying a new car so she would feel more secure, while she threw our marriage in the trash with the ease of someone throwing away an empty package. I remember thinking about divorce right away. Not about fights, not about scandals. A surgical divorce. Cold. But with a taste of sweet revenge. A divorce that would make her crawl to get back, that would make her beg. And she begged. When everything came to light, and it did, because the truth is not patient, it slips through the cracks, she cried, got on her knees, called me her love, her life, everything she had stopped being when she preferred to present herself as single. She said it was a mistake. That it was one night. That I was the man of her life. But it was too late. Because the poison had already spread, and there was no longer any antidote. She lost everything. And not because I wanted her to, but because she gave it up. She gave up her trust, her respect, the image she had built in front of her daughter, in front of her own family. They didn't stand by her. Her parents, her brothers, her nephews, they all stood by me. Maybe because they saw in my eyes the pain of a man who had given everything and received nothing. Maybe because they knew who I was to her. Or because they couldn't recognize the daughter they had raised in that woman who lied so easily. Either way, I didn't have to prove anything. She destroyed herself. And her lover? Oh, her lover, he disappeared. When he realized that she was no longer the married, well-adjusted, stable woman who promised excitement and adventure, but an ex-wife in crisis, homeless, without support, without anything, he simply disappeared. The irony is that when I finally signed the divorce papers, I no longer felt angry. I felt sorry. And a pang of shame for having, one day, believed so much in someone who fell apart so easily. The hardest part was explaining everything to our daughter. But even in this, the truth was the best answer. She herself chose who she wanted to be with. There was no fight. There was no dispute. Just a serene, silent, but definitive choice. And she chose to stay with me. Maybe because he saw everything, even without seeing it. Because children understand more than adults imagine. And because she knew where true love was. The love that wakes up early, makes coffee, goes to school meetings, listens without judging, and knows how to apologize when it makes a mistake. And now. Now I follow. The house became quieter, but also lighter. The days have color again. And even love, the true kind, which we think only happens once, came back to visit me. He came quietly, with a discreet smile, and stayed. Today, when I remember the betrayal, it still hurts, of course. But it's a pain that made me stronger. More whole. And more certain of who I am. And hers? All that was left was silence. Because even those who scream the loudest, when they lose everything, learn that there are times when the world simply turns its back. And maybe, just maybe, she learned that there are mistakes that life does not forgive. But what she did next, that was what really surprised me. And what came next, not even in my worst nightmares could I have imagined. Welcome to the channel. Here, we make it clear from the beginning, we do not support any kind of betrayal. The stories you're about to hear are fictional, but based on cruel realities, and they have one purpose, to show how infidelity corrodes, destroys, and leaves deep scars on those who truly trusted. Get ready. What you're about to hear now is not just a story, it's a shock of emotions. Buckle up, because this story will move you. From the beginning, the relationship between Daniel and Clara seemed to flow like those wide, calm rivers that only reveal their strength when they overflow. They met when they were still young, at a university conference. He was studying civil engineering and she was studying business administration. They were both at different stages in their lives, but they shared a discreet sense of humor, a balanced ambition and a very similar way of observing the world, with a certain caution, like someone who knows that too much happiness attracts envy. Their first conversation lasted for hours. They exchanged phone numbers without yet knowing that this was not just another contact, but the first brick of a castle that they would build together, with effort, sacrifice and love. The following years were intense. Daniel was always methodical, silent, and patient, like someone who solves problems in construction plans. Clara, on the other hand, was all about movement. Communicative, sensitive, and her presence filled any room. Friends said she lit up the house, and Daniel was the foundation. They were different, yes, but these differences did not cause friction, they complemented each other. And, over time, they began to create a solid marriage, the kind that inspires other couples. The ceremony was simple, with few guests, but full of meaning. They dispensed with excesses and invested in what mattered most, a life together with freedom, respect, and joint projects. After the wedding, he had chosen to live in a house far from the city center. Even though she was more urban, Clara accepted. There, she discovered a new rhythm of life, calmer and more centered. They planted a small garden, set up a bookshelf that took up almost the entire wall of the living room, and developed the habit of cooking together on Sundays. It was details like these that sustained their intimacy. It wasn't a movie romance, but an everyday affection, touching hands in the kitchen, laughing during conversations about trivial television programs, comfortable silences. The complicity between them grew in their routine, in the naturalness with which Clara would sit next to Daniel on the couch to hear about his structural calculations, or how he would listen attentively to her talking about her team at work, even without understanding the dilemmas of people management. They had a daughter, Sophia, and it was as if the love that already seemed great had found a way to multiply. Clara immersed herself in motherhood with tenderness and dedication. Daniel, although a little more strict in certain aspects, became a present, involved father. In Sophia's early years, he took turns with Clara during sleepless nights, learned to prepare baby bottles, changed diapers with the dexterity of someone who designs complex structures. The two supported each other in everything. They argued, of course, like any couple, but they always found their way back to each other. Over time, Clara's career began to take off in ways she hadn't even expected. In less than 5 years, she was promoted 3 times, took on leadership roles, and became one of the main references in the company where she worked. This required traveling, business dinners, and last-minute meetings. Daniel understood. He supported her. He was proud. Sometimes he complained about the increasingly short time he had for the little things they used to do together, but he never stopped her from growing. When Clara was invited to lead a strategic project at another branch, he himself encouraged her to accept. After all, she had always been by his side during the decisive moments in his life, and now it was time to give back. While Clara was gaining more space in the corporate world, Daniel continued with his more reserved pace. Working as a chief engineer at an urban infrastructure company, he kept his schedule stable, his habits unchanged. He was the one who took Sophia to and from school, helped with her chores, and took care of the household chores. Their roles balanced each other, even with Clara's exponential growth in the professional environment. And, although there was fatigue, the two remained connected. Fridays were sacred: wine, old movies, and unhurried conversations. They didn't always manage to do it, but when they did, it was as if they were silently renewing their vows. Sophia grew up surrounded by affection. Intelligent and sensitive, her parents were clear examples of commitment. She knew her mother was busy, but she also knew how much she made a point of being there. And her father, with his constant serenity, was her safe haven. The bond between father and daughter was strong, a bond built on every trip to school, in every story told before bed. Daniel was discreet in his affections, but with Sophia, it was as if he opened a secret compartment of his heart. Everything seemed in harmony. The house, although quieter with Clara's increasingly constant absence, was welcoming. The walls carried memories of a family that had been built with love. Clara, even with a busy schedule, made a point of decorating the house on special occasions, writing thank-you notes to Daniel, or preparing his favorite dish when she had a free evening. There was a balance, even if sometimes fragile, between her intense professional life and his more stable daily life. Friends saw the two as an example of a modern partnership. A couple who understood that love is also made of concessions, adaptations, and mutual support. And on the surface, everything was going as it should. But, as in every true story, there were gaps that grew slowly, almost invisible. Little silences at dinners where there used to be laughter. Messages replied late. Nights when Clara would arrive later than expected and, when questioned, would smile wearily and say, "It was a long meeting." Daniel believed. I always believed. Because that's what he did, he trusted. He loved without bargaining, without suspicion, without games. There was a party coming up. An important event for Clara's company. She had talked excitedly about it for days. She said it would be an opportunity to relax, to meet some colleagues from another branch in person, to strengthen connections. Daniel, even though he was a little uncomfortable with social events, said he would go with her. He wanted to be by her side. To see up close the world that she now dominated with such ease. She smiled and thanked him with a light kiss, but didn't insist too much. She said he could go if he wanted, but that it wasn't mandatory. On the night of the event, Daniel chose a new shirt. It wasn't his style, but he wanted to please. Clara looked more beautiful than ever. She was wearing an elegant dress, a striking perfume, and light but impeccable makeup. On the way, she talked excitedly about the company's latest results and the possibility of a new promotion. Daniel listened, admired, and felt proud. He thought that, despite all the challenges, they were succeeding. They were keeping a firm foundation, even with the strong winds of adult life. When they arrived at the venue, Clara quickly went to greet her colleagues, while Daniel poured himself a drink and watched from afar. She moved around lightly, exchanging hugs and laughs, and drew attention. She was admired. Daniel knew this and didn't mind. On the contrary, he felt good to see her shine. He knew how much she had worked to get there. After a while, he went to the bathroom. He washed his face. He took a deep breath. He smiled when he saw his reflection. He felt good. He felt that, despite everything, they were still a team. But when he left that bathroom, something changed. And everything he believed in, everything he had built, that entire castle built with so much zeal and loyalty, would begin to shake. And soon he would realize that not all structures, no matter how solid they seem, can withstand a blow coming from where one least expects it. The room was filled with a sophisticated vibe, voices mingling against a discreet musical backdrop, soft lights reflecting off the champagne glasses, and Clara seemed perfectly at home in the setting. Daniel, initially out of place, gradually adapted, greeting faces that were unfamiliar to him with a restrained smile, observing the small social rituals of that corporate environment that was his wife's territory. Clara seemed to shine in a different way that night, moving among the guests naturally, smiling with her eyes, enchanting with her voice. She was wearing a black dress made of flowing fabric that seemed designed for her. And yet, Daniel did not feel diminished. On the contrary, he felt proud. He thought that this glow was also part of him, a shared achievement. When she came up to him and introduced him to some colleagues as her husband, he felt something akin to gratitude. For being there. For still being part of history. At one point, Daniel stepped away to go to the bathroom. Everything was in perfect order, everything seemed to be following the smooth course of an elegant evening. As he walked down the side hallway, he gave a slight wave to a waiter and left his empty glass on a silver tray. In the bathroom mirror, he adjusted the collar of his shirt, ran his hand through his hair, and attempted a smile. He thought about Clara. How she had changed in the last few years. More confident, more distant at times, busier, but still the woman he had fallen in love with. Marriage, he thought, was not a fairy tale, it was a construction. And he was willing to keep building. He left the bathroom with the ease of someone who had already accepted that real life is made up of adjustments. But as he crossed the hallway again, before even turning the corner that would take him back to the living room, he heard it. The sentence came clearly, as if it had not been muffled by the ambient noise, nor distorted by the distance. "I'm single," Clara said, with a light, almost mocking laugh, and Daniel felt a chill that did not come from the air conditioning. He stopped. His head spun quickly, trying to find logic, trying to convince himself that he had misheard, that it was not possible, that maybe it was someone else, an absurd coincidence. But then he recognized the voice again. The timbre. The cadence. It was her. He instinctively backed away, leaning against the wall. His heart was racing, the blood filling his ears like a war drum. He felt his breath catch for a moment. Curiosity overcame his pride and he peeked in. There she was, facing a man he had never seen before. A younger man, with a cynical smile and a confident look, who was holding a glass of red wine as he leaned his body toward hers. Clara was laughing, with a slight touch of false shyness, as if she were flirting for the first time. And there was no wedding ring on her left hand. Daniel remembered that, hours before, when leaving the house, she had mentioned that the ring was tight and that she wanted to adjust it. He also remembered that he had not felt anything suspicious about that comment. Only now did he realize how perfectly that excuse fit the moment. Time seemed to freeze, but there was no ice enough to stop the fire that was starting inside. Still unseen, Daniel slowly walked back the way he had come, leaving the hall, breathing as if he were trying to contain a panic attack. Outside, the night air seemed thin. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were fixed. There were no tears, not yet. There was disbelief. There was the weight of a betrayal creeping in, not yet fully proven, but strong enough to crumble the structure of trust he had so carefully built. The ride home that night was silent. Clara, now composed, sat in the passenger seat as if nothing had happened. She talked about the party, about the compliments she had received for her project presentation, about how excited her colleagues were about the possibilities. Daniel listened and responded in monosyllables. He tried to read between the lines. But she was skilled. And it seemed like she had rehearsed every sentence. In the days that followed, he tried to deny what he had heard. He tried to give it a less painful name. But the image wouldn't leave his head. The phrase repeated itself like an echo. And her behavior, now seen from another perspective, began to reveal details that had previously gone unnoticed. The messages deleted on the cell phone. The muffled laughter in connections. The hasty exits with generic excuses. The new clothes without explanation. The nights she said she was too tired to talk. The doubt became a silent obsession. Daniel was not a suspicious man. But he felt that something had broken. He could not pretend. He began to observe her more closely, without her noticing. He marked her schedules. He noticed her delays. He even went to her company on a day off, parked across the street, only to see her leaving with the same man from the party. They laughed. They walked too close to be just colleagues. She had never mentioned his name. She had never told him who he was. She had never even mentioned that he existed. And that was worse than anything. It was as if she had chosen to build a parallel life, a universe where he, her husband, the father of her daughter, did not exist. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He wrote a letter. He didn't deliver it. But he needed to organize his thoughts. He remembered every birthday they had celebrated. Every night he had comforted her during work crises. Every time she had cried when she talked about her daughter's future. And now all of that seemed to have been used, manipulated, and betrayed in a cold way. There was no more innocence. All that was left was emptiness. In the days that followed, he sought advice. He didn't talk to friends. He talked to a lawyer. He wanted to understand his rights. He wasn't thinking about revenge yet, but he needed to know what to do. He needed to protect his daughter. Protect himself. He began gathering evidence. He took photos. He saved conversations. It was no longer a question. It was a fact. Clara was having an affair. Despite this, he didn't confront her. Not yet. He waited for the right moment. He wanted to look her in the eyes when he told her he knew. He wanted to see if there was any regret, shame, if there was any trace of the woman he had fallen in love with. And it was on a random weekend, on a Saturday when Clara said she was going out for a company appointment, that Daniel decided to act. He called a trusted babysitter and dropped Sophia off at a friend's house. He got in the car, put on some modest clothes, and went to the address he had found after some research. It was a discreet but expensive hotel. He parked across the street and waited. And then he saw it. Clara, walking in hand with that man. Laughing. Without looking back. Without hesitation. Daniel remained in the car for almost an hour after that. Time seemed to have no measure. When he returned home, he washed his face, sat in the dark living room and stared into space. The betrayal, now exposed, was an open wound. But there was still something he didn't understand, something deeper, hidden beneath this surface of pain. An uncomfortable intuition. A detail that still eluded him, but that would soon come to light. Something that would make everything change again. And this time, forever. The revelation did not come with shouts or scandals. It came with the piercing silence of a thick envelope left on the living room table, while Clara was still sleeping in her room. Daniel spent the night awake, organizing everything. He no longer needed to pretend that everything was fine, he did not need to remain calm or smile to hide his inner disarray. The betrayal was confirmed, exposed, irreversible. But there was still the secret. The missing piece. The detail that gave meaning to the sudden coldness, the emotional absence, the elaborate lies. In that envelope were the bank records, the statements of recent transfers, the copy of the contract for a furnished apartment with cash payment made only 3 weeks ago in Clara's name, and the proof of a large amount of money transferred to a third-party account. A name he did not know. Yet. The day began warmly. Clara walked down the stairs barefoot, wearing the silk nightgown she usually wore on special nights. When she saw the envelope, she hesitated, her eyes hardened, but she tried to maintain her composure. He, sitting on the sofa, stared at his cup of coffee as if she had something to say. "You already know, don't you?" Her voice sounded low, choked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He stood up slowly, picked up the envelope, handed it to her and simply said, "Explain. But this time, don't underestimate me." Clara swallowed hard. She sat down, opened the papers with trembling hands. She read. She recognized everything. She knew there was no way to deny it anymore. And then, finally, she broke down. She said that the apartment was for her and her lover. That she planned to leave home soon, but that she didn't have the courage to tell him yet. That she thought that maybe their relationship would last until the end of the year, until Sophia turned 10. That she believed that he, Daniel, was a good man, but that she needed something more. She tried to justify herself with words like empowerment, self-knowledge, emotional freedom. But each term felt like a slap in the face to someone who had always given everything. And he listened without interrupting. His silence hurt more than any scream. When she finished, he simply asked, "And our daughter? Where does she fit into this new life plan?" Clara's response was hesitant. She said she planned to see her on the weekends. That the new apartment didn't have enough space for a child. That her routine was too heavy to take care of a daughter full-time by herself. She said Daniel was more stable, more prepared, and that he could provide a more balanced environment for Sophia. Daniel didn't answer. He just nodded. That was all she needed to hear. She was giving up on her daughter. Abandoning the most sacred role a woman can assume. And that, for him, was worse than marital betrayal. There, in front of him, there was no more room for doubt. There was no more redemption. Days later, the proceedings began. Daniel filed a request for sole custody of Sophia, alleging emotional abandonment and evident lack of interest. The lawyer was clear, the odds were on his side. Clara, upon hearing of the petition, did not show any immediate reaction. Perhaps because she believed she could reverse the decision. But when the hearing was scheduled and the lawyers began to present the documents, photos, messages, and recordings, all discreetly obtained by Daniel in the previous weeks, she understood that the situation had gone beyond her control. The judge, after analyzing all the evidence, granted custody to Daniel. Clara would have limited visits, supervised if necessary. The decision was like a sentence of exile. Her family, upon finding out the details, turned their backs. Her mother, who had always defended her tooth and nail, said she no longer recognized her. Her father, strict and traditional, declared that there was no forgiveness for someone who abandoned their own daughter. The siblings cut off contact. Clara tried to argue, tried to justify, but no words could sustain her image anymore. It was as if everything she had built socially collapsed all at once. Her lover, in turn, upon learning of the court decision, of her daughter's estrangement and of the family breakdown, backed off. He didn't want a relationship with so much weight, so much exposure. He disappeared without warning. He blocked her number, deleted photos, and disappeared from the company, claiming he had a better offer abroad. Clara lost everything. And the void was filled with the sound of her own regret. She tried to go back. She sent letters, called Daniel, begged for meetings. She said she was lost, that she didn't know what she was doing. That she had never stopped loving him, that her passion for the other man was just a temporary escape. But now there was no way to escape the consequences. Daniel, in response, stood firm. Not out of pride, but out of respect for his own sanity. He had spent too many nights trying to understand the signs, the silences, the false gestures. He had been completely betrayed, as a husband, as a father, as a life partner. One afternoon, Clara showed up at Sophia's school door without warning. She wanted to see her. The girl ran to her father, hid behind his legs, and refused to embrace her mother. "Are you leaving again?" she asked, her eyes brimming with tears. Clara knelt down, crying, but couldn't answer. Daniel calmly walked away with his daughter and simply said, "She'll look for you when she's ready. And when you're a different woman." The scene, witnessed by some parents and teachers, spread like wildfire. Clara, once a professional and personal role model, was now viewed with judgmental eyes. She felt the stares, the whispers, the rejections on the streets. And all of that seemed to weigh more heavily than she had ever imagined. While Clara was falling apart, Daniel was rebuilding. Slowly but surely. He managed to adapt his work routine to spend more time with Sophia. She created new habits, introduced conversations that previously had no place, helped her daughter understand, with simple and sincere words, that, sometimes, the people we love most make decisions that we cannot understand. He didn't demonize Clara. But he didn't hide the truth either. "I wanted my daughter to grow up knowing that love is action. And trust, once broken, does not return with promises, it returns with actions. If you come back." But what Daniel didn't know yet was that the hole was deeper. Much deeper. And that Clara's downfall had not been just a consequence of betrayal. There was something hidden. Something she has maintained tooth and nail until now. A secret that, when revealed, would completely transform the way he viewed the last few months. Because the truth, when it finally emerged, would not just be painful, it would be humiliating. Definitive. Irreversible. It was on a seemingly ordinary morning, with clear skies and a light wind, that Daniel learned that the story had not yet reached its conclusion. He received a call from his lawyer informing him that he had been notified by a third party, requesting the right to formally contest Sophia's custody. The document cited a prolonged emotional and financial involvement between the minor's mother and the applicant, with evidence that could directly affect the court's decision. Daniel read the email with cold hands and a damp forehead. There was something wrong there. Very wrong. The name mentioned, Marcelo Ferraz, meant absolutely nothing to him. It was not the lover he had seen. It was not even someone from within Clara's professional circle. But it was, apparently, someone who believed he had the right to interfere in his daughter's life. And that turned everything inside out. He sought out the lawyer personally. He needed to understand every detail. They sat down, exchanged papers, and analyzed dates. The revelation came in a cold, technical, but cutting paragraph. Marcelo claimed to have had an extramarital relationship with Clara for over a year, claimed to have contributed financial resources toward the purchase of a property registered in her name, and said that there were mutual promises to form a new family unit, which, according to him, included joint custody of the child. Daniel felt his stomach churn. All of this had happened at the same time that Clara was asking for time, demanding understanding, and saying she was exhausted by the routine. She hadn't just cheated on him with a man. She had built a new life behind his back. With someone else. With another plan. And now, she was allowing this stranger to dare to dispute the rights to the daughter she herself had abandoned. Daniel took a deep breath. He needed to see Clara. Not out of anger, that phase was over, but because he needed answers. Real ones. Without masks. He called her and demanded a meeting. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. They met at a discreet cafe, far from the center, where none of the families he knew usually went. Clara arrived visibly uncomfortable, with sunken eyes and unkempt hair, as if the days had finally begun to weigh on her shoulders. When they sat down, Daniel went straight to the point. He placed the paper on the table and said firmly, "You're going to tell me everything. This time, no shortcuts. Or I'll find out for myself. And you know I can." Clara read it, turned pale, and lowered her eyes. For a few seconds, she remained silent. Then, in a choked, almost childish voice, she confessed. She said that Marcelo was an old friend from her youth. Someone she had met again by chance at a conference out of state. At first, they were just exchanging nostalgic messages. But they soon became confessions, secrets, desire. Clara explained that, unlike her other lover, Marcelo was not just a fling, he was an escape plan. A project for a new life. A man who promised freedom, excitement, a new beginning. He, according to her, introduced himself as a widower, with resources, willing to invest in a future together. Clara, intoxicated by everything that her current life no longer offered, accepted the tacit agreement. Marcelo helped finance the apartment, bought furniture, and set up a joint account. And all of this happened in the same months in which she still slept next to Daniel, still picked up Sophia from school, and still said, "I love you," as if nothing was falling apart. Daniel listened in silence, but his body seemed to physically resist the words. Each sentence was a hammer blow, a cut, an emptying. It was no longer just a physical betrayal, nor even an emotional one. It was the complete breaking of everything he understood as a family bond. When Clara finished, he remained motionless for a few seconds. Then he stood up, picked up the papers, and before leaving, he simply said, "You didn't lose your family because of a mistake. You sold it." In the following days, the legal issue intensified. Marcelo tried to force a rapprochement, sending messages to Clara, proposing that they resume their relationship, now that everything was out in the open. She, however, found herself cornered. After losing her most superficial lover, she thought Marcelo was her haven. But now, under the cold light of reality, she saw that he didn't want love, he wanted control. He wanted to use her daughter as an argument, as currency, as a means of conquest. She tried to push him away. She said she didn't want to see him anymore. But he responded directly, "Either you come back to me, or I'll go all the way with this case. And I'll get access to your daughter, even if it's through a preliminary injunction." Desperate, Clara looked for Daniel. She called, sent messages, showed up at his house crying. Sophia was with her paternal grandparents that weekend. Daniel let her in. They sat at the kitchen table. She talked about her fear. She said that Marcelo was obsessed, that he threatened to release photos and conversations, that he wanted to destroy what was left of her reputation. She asked for help. She begged. She said that she had made mistakes, that she knew it, but that now she wanted to protect her daughter. For the first time in a long time, Daniel saw something close to real remorse in her. But he was unmoved. With polite coldness, she said, "The only way to protect our daughter is for you to sign the definitive waiver of custody. And to cut off all contact with this man. Forever. Otherwise, I myself will go to court to file a restraining order against you and him." Clara hesitated. But she understood. She knew it was the only way to save at least part of what she had destroyed. Days later, she signed the documents. Marcelo was notified and tried to appeal, but without legal support, and in view of the evidence of his attempted emotional coercion, his request was denied. The courts recognized the risk and prevented any contact between him and Sophia. His name was permanently buried in that story. But the damage he caused would continue to be imprinted in every choice, in every memory, in every fragment of what was once a family. Clara now lived alone. She was removed from the company, rejected by her parents, ignored by her siblings, and only allowed supervised monthly visits. She tried to rebuild herself, but everything around her seemed like a minefield. Daniel, on the other hand, did not feel victory. He felt lucidity. A painful lucidity, matured by force, forged in nights of doubt, in days of hidden tears, in silent hugs given to his daughter while pretending that the world was still safe. One cold night, when putting Sophia to bed, the girl asked if her mother would ever come back to live with them. Daniel, with a lump in his throat, replied, "Some people choose paths that take them away from us. But that doesn't change how much we've loved. And how much we must move on." She just smiled and said, "I like it here. It's really quiet here." Daniel turned off the light, kissed her forehead, and closed the door slowly. In the living room, he sat on the sofa. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Because even after the devastation, the lies, the triple betrayal, he was still there. With her dignity intact, with her daughter by her side and with the certainty that no abyss is deep enough to swallow those who decide to continue. And now, what would come after that would be just the rebirth of someone who, even though hurt, learned to love again, but without ever forgetting the price of trusting someone who didn't deserve it. In the days following the court closure, something strange began to take place in Daniel's life. It was not relief, nor was it satisfaction. It was a kind of emotional silence, as if the internal noises that had previously screamed for answers had been replaced by a disconcerting calm. He no longer sought to understand the whys, nor did he revisit scenes mentally as before. Now, he walked among the ashes with firm steps, careful not to trip over unresolved memories. Clara's decision to give up full custody of Sophia, although rationally understandable given the mistakes made, still echoed in some corners of everyday life like a void that he could not fill with logic. As much as he felt that it was the right thing to do, that his daughter was safer with him, there was a moral shadow hanging over everything. What do you do when you win a battle that, deep down, you never wanted to fight? The days took on a new routine. Sophia, more stable, showed a lightness she hadn't had in months. She would come home from school smiling, with trivial stories, with questions about the world, about the future. Sometimes, Daniel would get lost just watching his daughter play, trying to decipher how much of that serenity came from the relief of being away from the emotional turmoil that the mother figure had become, and how much was just a reflection of childhood finally finding a safe place to flourish. Still, it was impossible to avoid the questions. The subject of mother came up little by little, in scattered phrases, in naive comparisons, in heavy silences. He learned to answer without inflaming wounds. He always told the truth as possible. That his mother needed time. That she was reorganizing her life. That mistakes are part of the adult journey, but that true love, that of a father and mother, was greater than any wrong decision. And that seemed to be enough, at least for now. Clara, on the other hand, lived in a different kind of time. Hers was the time of relentless regret, the time of empty spaces that cannot be filled with either memory or regret. Cut off from her old network of contacts, without family support and now with limited access to her daughter, her days began to be marked by a type of introspection that bordered on claustrophobia. Tried to start over. He moved to a new neighborhood, took temporary jobs, and joined support groups. But nothing could redeem what he had done. The souvenirs didn't allow it. At night, when I went to bed, I no longer heard my daughter's voice saying, "Good night," or the clinking of cutlery in the kitchen after family dinner. What he heard was the echo of his own voice when he lied. The muffled sound of fake laughter. The cruel reverberation of the phrase she had once said at a party, "I'm single." This now sounded like an epitaph. A banal phrase that became a sentence. The first official visit to his daughter took place on a spring Sunday. Supervised, as required by court order. Clara arrived with a bag of new toys, but hesitantly, almost curled up inside her own body. Sophia hugged her, but with the kind of hug you give someone you no longer recognize as home. They played a little, painted, put together a puzzle. The conversation was light, as if the girl, still not mature enough to understand the full extent of the facts, had learned to protect her own heart through superficiality. At the end of the allotted time, Clara held her daughter's small hands and told her that she loved her, that she thought about her every day, that she would do everything differently if she could go back. Sophia looked at her intently and replied sweetly, "I know. But now it's Daddy who takes care of me." That broke Clara in a way that not even the court decision had been able to do. Because it was different to hear it from the judge and to hear it from the daughter's own mouth, in a tone in which she did not accuse, but simply stated. The moral dilemma that Daniel now faced was different. He had the option of removing Clara from his daughter's life once and for all, of reinforcing the negative image and consolidating the bond with Sophia as the only emotional pillar. But this bothered him. It wasn't revenge that he wanted. It was justice. And justice, sometimes, required compassion. Even if this compassion was fraught with pain. So, he began to consider, together with Sophia's lawyer and therapist, the possibility of gradually extending the visitation period, as long as Clara maintained her commitment to psychological treatment and to a stable life. It wasn't an easy decision. There was the fear that any gap would allow the return of destructive behavior. But there was also the certainty that a child needs, at the very least, to have the chance to rebuild trust in the person who gave birth to him. In this context, an unexpected figure appeared. A woman named Anna, a teacher at Sophia's school, who began to cross Daniel's path more frequently. At first, their meetings were brief and formal, about school matters. But little by little, longer conversations began at the gate, exchanging messages about school events, then about books, movies, and children. Anna was also a single mother. She had lost her partner in an accident and was raising her son with the help of her parents. She was discreet, sensitive, and had that look in her eyes that shows someone who understands what is not said. Daniel, reluctant at first, realized that talking to her was not burdensome. It was light. Natural. For the first time in a long time, he felt free to explain himself, to justify emotional absences, to express his pain. Anna did not treat him as a broken man, but as someone who still had value. There was no rush, no promises. Just meetings that began to make sense. Dinners with the children, walks in the park, afternoons of conversation while the girls played. It was different from everything he had had with Clara. There was less overwhelming passion, but more truth. Fewer unrealistic expectations, more presence. Daniel found himself smiling again, for little things. Taking Anna's hand in the car without realizing it. Thinking about her while making breakfast. Sophia noticed everything. She didn't ask, but she smiled when she saw her father happy. It was as if she herself knew, instinctively, that there was room to rebuild, as long as it was with someone who truly understood what it means to care for someone. Meanwhile, Clara remained silent. She fulfilled the agreement with discipline. She went to therapy sessions, worked in silence, and avoided any kind of provocation or drama. At some point, she understood that getting her daughter back might not mean having her back as she was before. But rather becoming someone she could admire again in the future. And that was perhaps the most difficult of all paths, the one in which redemption is not guaranteed, in which forgiveness depends on time, on example, on the slow reconstruction of each destroyed gesture. The tension between past and present had not disappeared. It was there, between the lines, in the looks exchanged between Daniel and Clara when they saw each other at school, in the brief messages exchanged to talk about Sophia. But now there was something new, a cautious, almost sad respect that had replaced the fury. They knew that what they had experienced would never be the same again. But they also knew that they would still share the responsibility of raising a child who needed them both, even if in different ways. And that was the new center of their relationship, no longer husband and wife, but two human beings trying to do the least bit right after so much wrong. Sometimes Daniel would walk into Sophia's room at night just to watch her sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched her breathe. In his serene expression, I found the strength to carry on. It was for her that he had endured the unbearable, that he had remained calm in the face of chaos, that he had chosen to rebuild rather than destroy. It was because of her that I now made room for the new, without fear. But it was also for himself. Because deep down, he knew, it wasn't just about getting over a betrayal. It was about learning to live with the scars, without letting them define what came next. And what was to come, he felt, would be the most surprising part of this whole story. Autumn arrived, spilling copper tones over the sidewalks, and with it came shorter days, colder mornings, and a new perception of time for everyone involved in this story that was no longer ordinary. Daniel, increasingly stable in his new routine, felt the passing of the seasons not only in the weather, but also within himself, as if his heart, once taken by storms, had finally learned to accept the natural rhythm of change. Sophia grew up with more attentive eyes, firmer speech, and bolder questions. Little by little, she showed curiosity about the recent past, but without the aggressiveness that many would expect from a child faced with abandonment. She did not ask for revenge, she asked for meaning. And this type of question requires an adult to be delicate, which Daniel learned to cultivate. One Saturday afternoon, the two of them were in the kitchen, making pancakes, one of the traditions they had created since it became just the two of them in that house. Between the mixing of the batter and the sound of the hot pan, Sophia suddenly asked a simple but sharp question, "Daddy, was Mommy ever your best friend?" Daniel paused for a second. The gesture of flipping the pancake hung in the air, and the smell of melting butter filled the silence between the question and the answer. Then he turned to his daughter and said, "Yes, she was. For many years, she was the person I talked to the most, laughed with the most, shared my life with the most. And even though things have changed, that doesn't erase what we've been through." Sophia seemed to digest that with the seriousness of someone who is building the foundation of something inside herself. "And do you think she could be my best friend again?" The answer didn't come right away. Daniel just reached out and touched her hair, saying, "I think time will show you who deserves to be by your side, daughter. And you'll know how to choose." The relationship with Anna, in turn, took on deeper contours. It was no longer just occasional meetings, dinners with the children or conversations exchanged at the school gate. There were touches that lasted longer, silences that were no longer uncomfortable, kisses that came with the naturalness of someone who no longer needed to hide their desire. But, even so, Daniel was cautious. He didn't want Sophia to see that relationship as a substitute. Anna knew this and respected it. They were building something different, without rushing, without imposing. The complicity between her and Sophia was born organically, and perhaps that was why it was so powerful. It was an affection that didn't require a title, just presence. On the other hand, Clara remained in the shadows of reconstruction. She had not managed to regain her professional position, nor to regain the trust of those who had once admired her. She now worked as an assistant in a small accounting office, a position she had accepted more out of necessity than vocation. Every month, she religiously fulfilled her legal obligations, attended therapy sessions and, when authorized, visited Sophia with the care of someone treading on sacred ground. There were no more promises in her gestures, only an attempt to demonstrate constancy. Even so, an invisible barrier still existed between her and her daughter, as if something essential had been damaged. Although Sophia welcomed her politely and affectionately, there was no sparkle in her eyes, no warmth in her words, no familiarity that once was enough with a look. Clara knew that this could not be repaired with gifts or rehearsed phrases. Only time, if well cared for, could try to sew together what she herself had torn. In one of the family therapy sessions proposed by the judge, Daniel, Clara and Sophia sat in the same room for the first time, with a psychologist mediating the conversation. The environment was neutral, with pastel-colored walls, toys in the corner and wide armchairs. Sophia drew with colored pencils while her parents answered questions. At one point, the therapist suggested an exercise: each of them should tell a happy memory in which all three of them were together. Clara spoke of a trip to the beach when Sophia was only 5 years old. Daniel mentioned a birthday party where they spent the whole day together, unhurriedly, baking a cake at home. When it was Sophia's turn, she put down her pencil, crossed her arms and said, "I remember when you taught me how to ride a bike. Mommy held on behind me and Daddy said I could do it." There was a silence that seemed to fill the entire space. Clara, with tears in her eyes, said, "You really did it. And now you're riding on your own, right?" Sophia looked at her and replied, "I am. But every now and then I still look back. Just to see if anyone is there." The therapist wrote it down silently. Daniel looked at his daughter and felt a painful mix of pride and compassion. That was it. They were all pedaling alone now, trying not to fall, looking back sometimes. Shortly after this session, Clara asked for a private conversation with Daniel. They arranged to meet on a park bench, away from everything and everyone. She arrived punctually, with a less worried expression than usual. She said she didn't want to get in the way or force anything. She just wanted to thank him. For his patience, for the way he had handled everything without exposing her more than she already had. She said that, despite everything, he was the most dignified person she had ever met in her life. Daniel listened in silence. He didn't feel angry, nor proud. He felt sorry for everything that could have been and wasn't. He then asked if she had really understood what she had done, not only to him, but to her daughter. Clara took a deep breath. She said that now she did. That in the first few months she thought it was just a matter of time, that Sophia would come back naturally. But now she understood that it wasn't enough to wait. She had to earn it. She had to build something new from scratch. And that could take years. Daniel just nodded. That's it. It really does. And maybe it won't even happen. But if you really want it, start like this, doing the right thing when no one is watching. It was that night that Daniel realized he was ready to move on. Not just because of the healing pain, nor because of Anna, but because he had reached a point where the other's choices no longer defined his worth. When he got home, he prepared dinner with Sophia, they listened to music, danced in the living room, and he realized that he no longer felt the weight of raising a daughter alone. I was no longer alone. I had a support network, I had a new emotional structure, I had new possibilities. The past no longer held him back, and the present was real enough to be lived fully. Anna realized this too. One night when Sophia had gone to bed early and they were both on the balcony, she said, "Do you think you'll ever be able to trust someone completely again?" Daniel looked at her calmly and replied, "I'm already trusting. Little by little, but I am. And not because they promised me anything. But because you stayed. You stayed when you could have left. And that, to me, speaks louder than any promise of love." Anna smiled, rested her head on his shoulder, and the silence that followed was the most comfortable of all. The story didn't have an end yet. But it already had direction. And what was to come, though uncertain, seemed, for the first time in a long time, promising. Because it wasn't about forgetting what happened, but about choosing what to do with what was left. And they, all of them, Daniel, Sophia, Clara, Anna, were, each in their own way, learning to live with their scars without allowing them to become shackles. Life, after all, doesn't stop. She just changes the tone. And whoever learns to listen to this new rhythm ends up finding, even after the chaos, a new way to dance. Time passed like a calm tide that slowly erases the footprints of an old storm, and there was no longer much to say about the past because the actions had already spoken for everyone involved. Clara, after months of navigating between shame and remorse, found her limit. It was not an abrupt collapse nor an announced scandal, it was a silent emptying, as if inside she had dried up all possibilities of excuse, and what was left was only the raw recognition of what she had become, without victimization or self-pity. When she visited Sophia in another of the supervised sessions, she took in her hands, not present, but a simple notebook with a blue cover where she had written letters to her daughter during all the weeks she was away, letters that she had never sent out of fear, shame, or not feeling entitled. Sophia listened to her mother's proposal with that look somewhere between curious and cautious, and when Clara finished reading the first letter, the girl said nothing, she just stood up and hugged her with a brief but sincere gesture, as if offering a chance and not an absolution. Clara cried silently, and for the first time in a long time it was not out of regret, it was out of hope. Daniel watched that scene with firm eyes and a peaceful heart. He knew he could not, nor did he want to, erase his daughter's mother. Seeing that gesture born from the child's sincere affection and not from the manipulation of an adult was all he needed as a father. It was proof that he had raised a girl capable of discerning that love is not about accepting everything, but about knowing when to allow a new beginning. After that, Clara never again tried to invade spaces that were not hers. She began to see her daughter in a more organic way, without impositions or speeches. She sought out a new therapist. She reformulated her professional ambitions and, over time, she began to find some meaning in the small commitments of everyday life. She got a job as a counselor in a social project that offered courses for single mothers. There, she found a new purpose. It was little compared to what she had before in terms of prestige or money, but it was real. Perhaps for the first time in many years, she was doing something that was not for status or an escape, but because she saw herself as useful and whole. On Daniel's side, the future was no longer a shadow of possibilities, it was a territory that he began to build with his own steps, without guilt or fear. The relationship with Anna matured naturally, consolidating itself as something that did not need labels because it was already evident in each gesture, in each choice. She did not take anyone's place. She did not need that. She simply occupied the space that was hers with genuine love and constant presence. Sophia embraced her as part of the routine, with the naturalness of someone who recognizes security and truth in the other. There were weekends when they traveled together to small towns just to walk along the riverbanks or eat home-cooked food in family restaurants. These were moments when Daniel realized that peace is not made of big events but of a succession of serene moments. Anna offered him a version of love that did not require explanations, only reciprocity, and that was everything he did not know he needed until he had the old house that was once the scene of painful memories was sold and Daniel bought a new, smaller but more cozy home where the rooms did not carry the echoes of what was destroyed. Sophia helped choose the colors of the walls, the furniture in the living room, the flowers in the garden, and painted a rainbow on the bedroom wall, which became a symbol of a new beginning. Anna brought her touch too, but without imposing herself as someone who wanted to command that home. On the contrary, she added an almost imperceptible but present delicacy to the details, like an embroidered tablecloth left on the table or a cup of tea prepared on cold days. It was a home rebuilt by the hands of someone who had already known ruin and therefore valued the firm foundations even more. Marcelo, the man who believed he had the right to claim a family that never belonged to him, tried to appeal to the courts once again, but was denied. All his claims were disregarded. Justice saw in his actions a clear attempt at emotional manipulation and abuse of power. His public image collapsed. He lost contracts. His reputation sank silently, like stones that sink to the bottom of the river and never return to the surface. He never again tried to contact Clara, Sophia or Daniel. He disappeared from the scene like a mistake that time decided to bury for good. The last chapter of this story happened on a spring afternoon 2 years after it all began. Sophia was about to turn 12 and was organizing a small presentation at school, a dramatic reading that the students prepared in pairs. That afternoon, Clara went to watch. She sat next to Daniel and Anna in a cramped auditorium with wooden chairs and the smell of new paper. When Sophia went up on stage to read her text, she looked at the three in the audience and smiled with a glow that said more than words. At that moment, none of them needed to speak because there was a clear and silent truth there. They had survived the destruction and had chosen to rebuild, not in the same way, not with the same roles, but with new bonds, new agreements, new ways of loving and moving on. When the event was over, Clara approached Anna and thanked her for everything, not for accepting Sophia but for respecting her as a mother. Anna responded with a brief and sincere hug and simply said, "She is wonderful, you two created someone incredible." Daniel watched from afar in silence. There was no more resentment, just the certainty that some stories do not need twists and turns to end well, they just need maturity, courage and a real willingness to change. And so the story came to an end not as a fairy tale nor as a tragedy but as a real life that went through darkness and found a way back to the light, because there is no greater punishment than losing what was built with love and realizing too late that time does not come back. But for those who choose the truth, for those who choose love and honesty, there will always be a chance to rebuild, not as it was before but as it can be better now. Tell me, what did you think of this story? Which part touched you the most? Do you think someone could have done it differently? Comment below with your opinion and let's talk about this intense journey we just followed. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell and share it with someone who needs to hear this here, and remember that this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Here we believe that true love requires respect, loyalty and courage. Until the next story that will touch your heart and your conscience.